Meet Sarah, a wife who thought she had it all, a loving husband, two beautiful kids, and a stunning home in the suburbs. But what lies beneath the surface of her perfect life? As we delve into the story, you'll discover the dark truth behind the facade of marriage and motherhood. Sarah's life was a perfect picture to the outside world. She had a loving husband, two adorable kids, and a beautiful home in the suburbs. But, behind closed doors, she was suffocating under the weight of her responsibilities. Her marriage felt like a routine, a series of tasks to be checked off each day: make dinner, attend school events, have sex on Friday nights. The intimacy had long since faded, replaced by a comfortable silence that filled the void. Sarah would often find herself wondering if she was just going through the motions, if this was really what she wanted for her life. As she navigated the daily chaos of motherhood and marriage, Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling that something was missing. She felt like she'd lost herself in the process of building a family. Her husband, John, seemed oblivious to her concerns, content with the status quo. He'd often joke about how lucky he was to have such a wonderful wife and kids, but Sarah couldn't help but feel trapped. As we delve deeper into Sarah's story, you'll see the cracks in her relationship start to form, like tiny fissures in a seemingly solid foundation. The comfort zone is where Sarah feels safest, but it's also where she's most suffocated. Sarah thought she had it all figured out. A comfortable home in the suburbs, a reliable husband, two kids who were thriving at school. What more could she want? But as she looked around her perfectly manicured living room, something felt off. It wasn't just the faint scent of yesterday's dinner lingering in the air that made her stomach turn. It was the feeling of emptiness that had been growing inside her for months. She'd started to rely on takeout and meal delivery services, skipping cooking altogether because it seemed like too much effort. And when she did cook, it was often with pre-made sauces and frozen veggies from the grocery store. Her social life had dwindled to weekly phone calls with a few close friends and an occasional playdate with the kids' friends' mothers. Sarah's comfort zone had become a prison of sorts. She'd traded in her sense of adventure for a sense of security. But at what cost? The thought of leaving her daily routine, even for just one day, filled her with anxiety. As she sat on her couch, surrounded by the trappings of convenience, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. As the months went by, Sarah started to notice little things that didn't quite add up. Her husband would cancel plans at the last minute, citing work or just needing some space. At first, she brushed it off as him being stressed, but the frequency of these cancellations began to wear her down. She'd catch him scrolling through his phone in meetings, his eyes darting back and forth with a mixture of guilt and anxiety. He started to become increasingly withdrawn, spending hours holed up in his home office, shutting out the rest of the world. Sarah tried to convince herself that these changes were just symptoms of their busy lives, but deep down she felt a nagging sense of unease. She'd find himself accidentally deleting her texts or forgetting important dates. It was as if he was hiding something from her, and it wasn't just his work schedule that was keeping him occupied. These red flags started to accumulate, like tiny cracks in the surface of their relationship. And yet, Sarah couldn't bring herself to confront them head-on. She'd rather ignore the signs and hold on to the comfort of convenience, even if it meant sacrificing a deeper connection with her partner. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah couldn't shake off this nagging feeling that something was off. She tried to brush it aside, telling herself she was just being paranoid. But the more she thought about it, the more her intuition screamed at her to pay attention. It started with little things. A missed phone call from an unknown number, a faint whisper in his voice when he answered hers. At first, Sarah wrote it off as exhaustion or a side effect of too much coffee. But as the incidents piled up, she couldn't ignore the knot in her stomach. She began to notice how evasive John was about his whereabouts during work hours. He'd say something like, "I had a meeting," and then quickly change the subject when she pressed for details. The more he dodged her questions, the more Sarah's mind started racing with worst-case scenarios. She felt like a detective trying to solve a puzzle. Every new piece of information seemed to fit into an unsettling picture. As suspicion took hold, Sarah found herself constantly on edge. Every time John left the house or answered his phone, she'd freeze, wondering what he was hiding. The comfort and convenience they had built their life around were now suffocating her. As Sarah continued to dig through the bills and receipts on their cluttered kitchen counter, her eyes landed on something that made her heart skip a beat. A credit card statement from a store she'd never heard of before, one that specialized in family entertainment packages. Her mind racing, she turned the page to see a series of charges with dates ranging from last year to just a few months ago. The amounts were staggering, but it was the description that sent a chill down her spine. Birthday party for 10 kids. Sarah's eyes widened as she felt like she'd been punched in the gut. Who was this party for? And why had her husband never mentioned it? She remembered the countless times they'd talked about starting a family of their own. But now she wondered if he'd been planning to do just that, with someone else. The more she thought about it, the more it all made sense. The frequent trips out of town for businesses, the late nights spent working from home, and the increasingly distant look in his eyes whenever she asked him about his day. As Sarah dug deeper into her husband's work schedule, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The late nights at the office, claiming to be working on a high-pressure project, seemed like an excuse rather than reality. She started to notice the inconsistency in his stories. One day, it was a meeting, the next a conference call. But it wasn't until she stumbled upon a suspicious email on his phone that the truth began to unravel. The web of deceit was vast and intricate, weaving together threads of lies, half-truths, and omissions. Sarah's husband had been leading a double life for years, with a second family, a secret home, and a carefully constructed facade designed to keep her in the dark. She remembered the countless times he'd canceled plans at the last minute, citing work obligations, when in reality he was attending family gatherings or school events. As she pieced together the evidence, Sarah felt like she was living a nightmare. The memories of their seemingly perfect life now seemed tainted by his duplicity. One lie led to another, and another, until it became clear that her husband's entire existence was built on a foundation of deception. As the truth sank in, Sarah's world began to crumble around her. She felt like she was drowning in a sea of pain, unable to catch her breath. The betrayal wasn't just about her husband's infidelity. It was about the lies he'd told her, the secrets he'd kept hidden for so long. But as she grappled with the anger and hurt, Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling that she was also complicit in this mess. She thought back to all the times she'd ignored her intuition, dismissed her doubts, and convinced herself that everything was fine. The memories flooded back, like the time she'd caught him being evasive about his work trips, or when she'd noticed a discrepancy in their bank statement. She had chosen to turn a blind eye, thinking it would be easier to just avoid the truth. But now, as she faced the reality of her husband's betrayal, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, what else was he hiding? And more importantly, how could she have been so blind to it all along? The days that followed were a blur for Sarah. She couldn't sleep, she couldn't eat, and she couldn't think straight. Her world had been turned upside down, and she was struggling to make sense of it all. Every memory, every conversation, every shared moment with her husband now felt tainted. She kept replaying their conversations in her head, searching for clues, wondering if there were any signs she had missed. And then there were the questions. What else was he hiding? How could she have been so blind to it all along? As Sarah navigated this dark new reality, she began to question everything they had built together. Their relationship, their home, their life. Was it all a lie? She felt like she was living in a nightmare, and she couldn't wake up. The more she tried to make sense of things, the more questions arose. Had he been planning this for years, or did something change along the way? And what about her own role in it all? Was she just an oblivious bystander, or had she somehow contributed to his deception? The uncertainty was suffocating, and Sarah felt like she was drowning in a sea of what-ifs. She couldn't even begin to imagine how this would end. But one thing was clear: their marriage as she knew it was over. Sarah sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall as she tried to process everything she'd discovered. Her husband's affair, his secret family. It was all still sinking in. She thought about the countless times he'd told her how much he loved her, how committed he was to their marriage. But it was all a lie. As she sat there, she couldn't help but wonder if she'd been blind all along. Had she ignored the signs because she didn't want to believe them? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that trust wasn't just about her husband's actions. It was also about hers. How had she let things get so far out of control? She thought back to the times they'd fought over little things, and how he'd always managed to charm his way out of trouble. Now she felt like she was living in a nightmare. Could she ever trust him again? And even if she could, would their marriage be worth saving? Sarah sat on the couch, staring blankly at the walls as she weighed her options. She thought back to all the times she'd made excuses for her husband's behavior. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the evasive answers. But now, with the truth finally out, she couldn't ignore it anymore. Her mind was a jumble of emotions: anger, sadness, guilt. She felt trapped in a life that wasn't hers. The marriage had become a convenient facade, a comfortable routine that masked the underlying issues. Sarah remembered the countless nights they'd spent arguing about her career goals, how he dismissed her aspirations as unrealistic. The resentment had been building for years. Now, she was faced with a choice: stay and compromise on her happiness, or leave and start anew. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This decision would change everything. The days that followed were a blur for Sarah. She went through the motions, trying to make sense of the new reality she'd created. But as she stared at the empty space where her husband used to be, she couldn't shake off the feeling of emptiness. It was like she'd traded one set of problems for another. The familiar comforts of their marriage were gone, replaced by an unsettling uncertainty. She'd thought that leaving would bring freedom, but it only brought a new kind of confinement. As Sarah navigated this uncharted territory, she began to realize just how much she'd been relying on her husband to fill the gaps in her life. She'd sacrificed so much: her independence, her self-worth, her identity, for the sake of convenience. And now that it was taken away from her, she was left with a harsh truth: she had no idea who she was without him. The silence in their home was deafening, and Sarah felt like she was drowning in it. She'd never been alone before. She didn't know how to be by herself. The weight of this new reality was crushing her, but it was also awakening something within her. As Sarah looked back on the events that had transpired, she realized that her relationship had been built on a foundation of convenience rather than commitment. She thought about all the times she'd let things slide: the missed dates, the unreturned calls, the excuses for not meeting in person. It was easier to just go with the flow, to prioritize comfort and familiarity over the hard work of building a real connection. But now, as she faced the harsh truth about her husband's infidelity, Sarah saw that convenience had come at a steep price. She thought about all the times she'd rationalized her partner's behavior: he's just stressed, or he's going through a tough time. But in reality, he was choosing to prioritize his needs over hers, and it was suffocating their relationship. Sarah felt a pang of regret for not speaking up sooner, for not demanding more from herself and from her partner. As we've been exploring the story of Sarah and Mike's relationship, you may have noticed a pattern emerging. At first glance, their marriage seemed perfect. They had beautiful children, a lovely home, and a comfortable lifestyle. But beneath the surface, convenience was slowly taking over. They started skipping date nights, relying on takeout and streaming services instead of cooking together or going out. They stopped having meaningful conversations, opting for quick texts and emojis to communicate. Sarah would often find herself exhausted from work, but Mike wouldn't be home until late, leaving her to do everything alone. She'd try to bring it up with him, but he'd just shrug it off, saying, "We'll catch up soon." But the truth is, they weren't catching up. They were just going through the motions. Sarah felt like she was shouldering all the responsibility, while Mike seemed content to coast along. And that's when the warning signs started to flash red: a decrease in intimacy, a lack of effort from one partner, and a growing sense of resentment. These are the warning signs that convenience is taking over your relationship. As we delve deeper into the consequences of convenience in relationships, you'll start to notice a subtle yet insidious trend: emotional numbness. It's like living in a state of constant autopilot, where every interaction feels forced, but not necessarily fulfilling. Sarah and Alex had been together for 5 years when they started relying on convenience as a crutch. They'd rather have takeout delivered than cook a meal together, and their conversations dwindled to mere surface-level small talk. Their relationship became a series of unfulfilling rituals: the same Netflix shows, the same coffee shop, the same tired jokes. The spark that once drew them together began to fade, replaced by a sense of obligation rather than desire. They'd argue about whose turn it was to do the dishes or who forgot to pick up milk from the store, but beneath the surface, they were both feeling disconnected and unfulfilled. As we explore these consequences further, you'll see how convenience can slowly erode the very foundation of a relationship, leaving behind a hollow shell of what once was. It's time to ask yourself, is your relationship worth fighting for, or are you settling for mere convenience over genuine connection? As we dive deeper into the complexities of relationships, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever felt like you're just going through the motions? That your partner is more concerned with convenience than commitment? It's not just about grand romantic gestures or weekend getaways. Commitment is about the everyday actions that show up in small but meaningful ways. As we delve deeper into the dynamics of their marriage, one thing becomes clear: communication was a luxury they couldn't afford. Or so it seemed. In reality, they were both masters at avoidance. He'd sidestep conversations about his schedule, while she'd conveniently misremember important dates. It's not that they didn't talk. They just talked around the truth. They became experts in misinterpreting each other's silences. The phone would ring, and he'd quickly switch it to voicemail, sending her a brief text instead of answering. She'd assume everything was fine, while inside, she was seething with resentment. This convenience came at a steep price. They were essentially living separate lives under the same roof. Their conversations became stilted, their laughter forced. The little white lies and omissions snowballed into full-blown distrust. And, just when you thought it couldn't get worse, it did. But as we explore the power of communication in relationships, you'll see that honesty can be a double-edged sword. It can heal wounds or ignite new ones. As we explore the impact on children, you'll see how convenience can become a slippery slope. For Sarah's daughter, Emily, it meant being constantly shuffled between homes, never really having a stable place to call her own. She'd switch between her mom's apartment and her dad's house, trying to adjust to new surroundings and faces every other weekend. The instability took its toll. She became anxious, withdrawn, and struggled in school. On the surface, it seemed like they were just making it work. But deep down, Emily knew something was off. She'd pick up on the tension between her parents, sensing that their relationships with each other were more important than anything else, including her own well-being. As a result, she began to feel like an accessory to their convenience, a temporary solution rather than a loved child. It's moments like these when you realize how convenience can become a toxic pattern in families. It may start as a temporary fix, but it can quickly turn into a long-term problem that affects everyone involved. And for children, the impact can be devastating. Sarah's story is a cautionary tale about what happens when convenience becomes the priority in a relationship. As we've seen, she and her husband had been together for over a decade. But behind closed doors, their marriage was unraveling. One of the first warning signs was the way they'd begun to rely on each other's emotional labor. She'd taken on more household responsibilities while he'd become increasingly distant and preoccupied with work. It was a typical Monday evening when the fog began to lift. Sarah had been going through the motions for months, managing the household, raising their 2 young children, and sacrificing her own needs for the comfort of familiarity. But as she watched her husband walk in the door, exhausted from another long day at work, something inside her shifted. She remembered a conversation they'd had years ago about building a life together, not just existing side by side. The thought struck her like a slap in the face. Was this really all she deserved? The exhaustion, the resentment, the feeling of being invisible. It wasn't a price she was willing to pay forever. For the first time, Sarah felt a spark of anger and frustration that went beyond mere disappointment. It was a primal urge to take back control, to reclaim her marriage from the comfort zone where they'd been stuck for so long. As we explore this turning point, you'll see how it can be both empowering and terrifying. But one thing is certain: Sarah will never go back to the way things were before. The aftermath of change can be a bittersweet experience, Sarah soon discovered. On one hand, she felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over her as she finally broke free from the suffocating grip of convenience. She no longer had to pretend to be someone she wasn't or compromise on what mattered most to her. But on the other hand, she faced a daunting reality: rebuilding her life without the crutch of her relationship. It was like trying to learn how to breathe again after years of holding your breath. Simple tasks became monumental challenges as Sarah struggled to find herself outside of the dynamic they had created. She felt like a puzzle piece that no longer fit into its assigned place, and it was disorienting. There were days she wondered if she'd made a huge mistake by leaving. But then there were moments when she caught a glimpse of her true self in the mirror, not as a partner or a wife, but as an individual with thoughts, feelings, and desires that mattered. As I reflect on my experience, I realize that I was living in a state of numbness. I thought I was sacrificing for the sake of our marriage, but in reality, I was giving up pieces of myself. The exhaustion, the resentment, it all built up until I hit rock bottom. But hitting rock bottom wasn't the end. It was the beginning. It forced me to reevaluate what I wanted from life and from my relationship. I learned that convenience isn't a sustainable way to live. It's a band-aid solution that temporarily covers up cracks in our relationships, but eventually, those cracks become chasms. I thought I was doing the right thing by being accommodating, by sacrificing my needs for his. But what I realized is that I was sacrificing my own happiness, my own sense of self-worth. As I look back, I see the warning signs, the way he would dismiss my feelings, the way I would silence mine. It's a pattern that repeats itself in many relationships, and it's one we need to be aware of. We can't keep ignoring our intuition, our needs, our desires. We have to make conscious choices about how we want to live, how we want to love. As I reflect on Sarah's story, I'm reminded that the price of convenience can be steeper than we ever imagined. We often think that sacrificing a little bit of ourselves for the sake of ease is a small trade-off. But what happens when that little becomes a lifelong pattern? Take, for example, the countless women who've confided in me about their own experiences with convenience-driven relationships. They tell stories of partners who prioritize Netflix over quality time, or who settle for half-hearted intimacy rather than confront the issues at hand. The result is a hollowed-out connection that's more like a roommate arrangement than a romantic partnership. Sarah's story serves as a warning to all of us. Don't confuse convenience with commitment. Don't mistake a temporary reprieve from conflict for a sustainable solution to our problems. If we want real love, real connection, and real happiness, we need to be willing to put in the work, not just when it's convenient, but always. As we wrap up Sarah's story, I want to leave you with a crucial reminder. Relationships are worth fighting for, but they're also worth letting go of when necessary. It's easy to get caught up in the convenience of staying put, even if it means sacrificing our own happiness. We convince ourselves that things will get better, that tomorrow will be different. But tomorrow often looks just like today and yesterday. Think about your own life. Have you ever stayed in a relationship or a job because it was easy, rather than because it truly made you happy? Maybe you've compromised on your dreams for the sake of stability or security. It's time to reevaluate what those costs are. What price are we paying for convenience? Is it our own well-being, our self-respect, our values? Sarah's story may seem extreme, but it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of settling. Remember that real happiness requires effort and commitment, not just when it's convenient, but always. As we reflect on the price of convenience, let's remember that it's not just about what we gain, but also what we lose. The comfort of complacency can be a thin line between love and heartbreak. But the good news is that it's never too late to make a change, to choose commitment over comfort, to fight for the relationship you truly want. So let this story be a wake-up call, a reminder to prioritize what matters most. And if you're still here with me, let's keep the conversation going. Subscribe now and join our community of women who are brave enough to face the truth and choose love over convenience.